The kitchen of the Ginza establishment was silent except for the precise sound of a knife against the cutting board. Hana moved with the kind of practiced grace that came from 15 years of culinary discipline. Her hands steady, her movements economical, her mind somewhere between the present moment and the muscle memory of 10,000 meals prepared. The restaurant was closed, the staff had left hours ago, and the only witness to her work was the stainless steel reflection of herself in the polished surfaces around her. She didn't hear him enter. That was the thing about Daichi. He moved like smoke, like something that had learned to exist in spaces without disturbing them. When she finally sensed his presence, it was because the air itself seemed to change density, and she turned to find him standing in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his charcoal suit, his left hand wrapped in a fresh bandage that hadn't been there that morning. "You're here late," he said. It wasn't a question. Daichi rarely asked questions when he already knew the answers. Hana set down her knife with deliberate care. The special for tomorrow needed preparation. The sea urchin came in fresh this afternoon and I wanted to— "Your wrists," he interrupted, his dark eyes narrowing. "Show me." The request hung in the air like a threat, though his voice had been perfectly neutral. Hana's hands instinctively moved to pull her sleeves down further, but the damage was already visible. Dark purple bruises circling both wrists, the kind that came from being grabbed hard enough to leave finger marks. She'd worn long sleeves all day, had kept her hands busy, had hoped no one would notice. But Daichi noticed everything. That was why he'd survived 32 years in a world where most men didn't make it past 40. "It's nothing," she said, turning back to her work. "I was careless with the prep work. Repetitive strain." Daichi crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and took her left wrist gently in his hand. His touch was careful, almost reverent, which somehow made it worse. He examined the bruises with the focused intensity of someone reading a text written in a language only he understood. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only crack in his composed exterior. "These aren't from prep work," he said quietly. "These are from hands. Human hands. Hands that wanted to hurt you." Hana pulled her wrist away, but not violently. There was no point in lying to Daichi. He'd built his empire on reading people, on understanding the subtle tells that separated truth from fabrication. It was a misunderstanding. It's handled. Who? The single word carried the weight of a decision that had already been made. "Daichi, please." "Who?" His voice didn't rise, but something in it changed. It became colder, sharper, like a blade being drawn from its sheath. Hana turned to face him fully, and for the first time, he saw the fear in her eyes. Not fear of him, but fear of what his knowledge would set in motion. She'd worked in this kitchen for 6 years, ever since Daichi had acquired the restaurant as part of a business arrangement that had nothing to do with food. She'd never asked questions about his other enterprises, the ones that happened in the back rooms and the basement levels of buildings throughout Tokyo. She'd simply cooked, created, built a reputation as one of the finest chefs in Ginza, and tried to pretend that the man who signed her paychecks was just a businessman with expensive tastes. But they both knew better. "Hideo," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "He came by the apartment 2 nights ago. He said he wanted to. He said he wanted to talk about us getting back together. When I said no, he got angry. He grabbed my wrists and pushed me against the wall. He said if I wouldn't come back to him, he'd make sure I couldn't work anywhere in the city." Daichi's expression didn't change, but his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Hideo Tanaka, the one who works at the financial firm." It wasn't a question. Of course he knew. Daichi knew everything about everyone who came near his orbit. He had people who kept track of such things. "He's not a bad person," Hana said, and the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "He was just angry. He didn't mean—" "He left marks on you," Daichi said, and his voice was different now. It had taken on a quality that made Hana's stomach clench. This was the voice of a man who had just made a decision, and decisions made in that tone tended to have permanent consequences. "He threatened your livelihood. He violated your space and your body, and you're standing here defending him." "I'm standing here asking you not to do anything," Hana said, moving toward him. "Whatever you're thinking, whatever you're planning, don't. Please." I'm asking you as someone who respects you, who works for you, who... She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Daiichi looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. The coldness receded slightly, replaced by something more complicated. Who what, Hana? She didn't answer. They both knew what she'd been about to say, and saying it would change everything. It would cross a line that had been carefully maintained for 6 years. The line between employer and employee, between the man who signed her paychecks and the woman who prepared his meals, between the Yakuza boss and the civilian who worked in his establishment. Go home, Daiichi said finally. Lock your doors. Don't go anywhere alone, and don't worry about Hideo Tanaka anymore. Daiichi! That's not a request, Hana. She wanted to argue, wanted to plead with him to let this go, to understand that violence would only beget more violence. But she'd known Daiichi long enough to recognize when a decision had moved beyond the realm of negotiation. She gathered her things, her hands trembling slightly as she untied her apron, and left the kitchen without another word. Daiichi stood alone in the silent space, looking at the knife she'd left on the cutting board. He picked it up, examining the blade with the same careful attention he'd given to her bruises. The knife was sharp, perfectly maintained, a tool designed for precision work. He set it down gently and pulled out his phone. The call was answered on the first ring. It's me, Daiichi said. I need you to find someone. Hideo Tanaka, works at Mizuho Financial Group. I need to know everything. Where he lives, where he goes, who he sees, and I need it by tomorrow morning. He ended the call and stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the tools of Hana's trade, and allowed himself a moment of something that might have been regret, or might have been rage. The two emotions felt very similar when you'd spent as long as he had in this world. By the next morning, Daiichi knew that Hideo Tanaka lived in a modest apartment in Shibuya, that he went to the gym 3 times a week at 6 a.m., that he had a weakness for expensive whiskey and cheaper women, and that he owed money to a loan shark named Koji who operated out of a pachinko parlor in Shinjuku. The loan shark was part of a rival organization, which meant that Hideo Tanaka was already in someone else's debt. This was useful information. Daiichi spent the day conducting business as usual, meetings with suppliers, negotiations with other business owners, the endless machinery of his empire grinding forward. But underneath it all, his mind was working on the Hideo Tanaka problem, turning it over like a puzzle, looking for the solution that would cause the least collateral damage while sending the clearest message. By evening, he'd made his decision. He didn't go to Hideo's apartment. He didn't send men to break his legs or put him in the hospital. Instead, he made a phone call to Koji at the pachinko parlor and arranged a meeting. They met in a private room above the establishment, a space that smelled of cigarette smoke and old money. Hideo Tanaka, Daiichi said without preamble. The debt he owes you. What's the amount? Koji, a man in his 60s with the scarred face of someone who'd survived decades in the Yakuza, regarded him with cautious curiosity. 3 million yen. Why? I'm going to pay it, Daiichi said. In exchange, you're going to deliver a message. What kind of message? You're going to tell him that his debt is cleared, that he's been given a gift by someone he doesn't know, someone he'll never know. And you're going to tell him that if he ever touches a woman named Hana again, if he ever speaks to her, if he ever comes within 100 meters of her, the gift will be revoked and he'll owe you double. And you'll make sure he understands that you're the kind of man who collects on debts. Koji smiled slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. You're using me as a messenger. I'm using you as a deterrent, Daiichi corrected. Hideo is already afraid of you. I'm just making sure that fear stays pointed in the right direction. And what do I get out of this besides the money? You get to tell your people that you cleared a debt without having to break anyone's bones. You get a favor from me, which in this business is worth more than money. And you get to keep your hands clean while still maintaining your reputation. Daiichi paused. Also, I'm paying you 50% more than the debt amount. Call it a finder's fee. Koji considered this, then nodded slowly. It's a good deal. I'll do it. Daiichi transferred the money that night, and by the next morning, Hideo Tanaka had received a visit from Koji's men. They didn't hurt him. They simply explained, in very clear terms, that his debt had been cleared by a mysterious benefactor, and that if he ever violated the terms of his new arrangement, the consequences would be severe. The message was delivered with enough menace that Hideo spent the next 3 days barely leaving his apartment, convinced that he was being watched. He was right. For the first week, Daichi had people observe Hideo's movements, making sure he understood the seriousness of the warning. But after that week passed without incident, Daichi called off the surveillance. The message had been received. When Hana returned to work the following Monday, she found a note on her station in the kitchen. It was written in Daichi's precise handwriting. Hideo Tanaka has been made aware that further contact with you will have serious consequences. You're safe. Focus on your work. She read the note 3 times, her hands shaking, understanding exactly what had happened and what it meant. Daichi had solved the problem without bloodshed, without violence, without crossing the line into the kind of brutality that would have been his right as a Yakuza boss. He'd used his connections, his intelligence, and his understanding of how the underworld worked to neutralize the threat. But more than that, he'd done it for her. Not as an employer protecting an asset, but as a man protecting someone he cared about. That evening, after the last customer had left and the kitchen was being cleaned, Hana found Daichi in his private office on the 2nd floor of the restaurant. The door was open, and he was reviewing paperwork, his reading glasses perched on his nose, looking more like a businessman than a Yakuza boss. "Thank you," she said from the doorway. He looked up, removing his glasses. "You're welcome. You didn't have to do that. You could have—" She stopped, unable to articulate the violence he'd chosen not to commit. "I know what I could have done," Daichi said quietly. "I chose not to. There's a difference." Hana stepped into the office and closed the door behind her. "Why?" Daichi set down his pen and leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "Because I'm tired, Hana. I'm tired of violence. I'm tired of solving problems with broken bones and blood. I'm tired of being the kind of man who can only express himself through fear and pain." He paused. "And because you asked me not to." "That's not a good enough reason," Hana said, moving closer. "In your world, sentiment gets you killed." "Maybe," Daichi acknowledged. "But I've been in this world for 20 years, and I'm still alive. Maybe it's because I know when to break the rules." He stood up, and suddenly the space between them felt very small. Or maybe it's because I've been waiting for a reason to break them. Hana's breath caught. "Daichi, I know," he said, holding up a hand. "You work for me. I'm your employer. This is complicated and dangerous and probably a terrible idea. I know all of that. But I also know that 6 years ago, when you started working here, something changed for me. Something I've been trying to ignore because it made no sense in the context of my life. But ignoring it hasn't made it go away." "What are you saying?" Hana whispered, though she already knew. "I'm saying that I care about you," Daichi said simply. "I'm saying that seeing those bruises on your wrists made me want to burn the city down. I'm saying that I've spent 6 years maintaining professional distance because I thought it was the right thing to do. But I'm not sure anymore. I'm not sure what the right thing is anymore." Hana took another step forward, and now they were close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of decisions made and lives affected by those decisions. "This is insane," she said. "Completely insane," Daichi agreed. "It could destroy everything you've built." "Probably," he said. "I could be a liability. I could be used against you." "Yes. And you're still—" "Yes," Daichi said. And then he reached out and gently took her hand, his touch careful, as if she might break. "I'm still choosing this. I'm still choosing you, if you'll let me." Hana looked at their joined hands, at the contrast between his scarred knuckles and her delicate fingers, at the impossibility of what he was suggesting and the inevitability of it at the same time. She thought about the bruises on her wrists, about the fear she'd felt, about the way he'd solved the problem without violence. She thought about 6 years of stolen glances and careful distance, of conversations that meant more than their words suggested, of a man who'd built an empire on fear choosing mercy instead. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "everything changes." "Everything already changed," Daichi replied. "The moment you walked into this kitchen 6 years ago, I'm just finally admitting it." Hana closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, She was crying. "I'm terrified." "So am I," Daiichi said, and she believed him. "But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe without you." She didn't answer with words. Instead, she stepped closer and rested her forehead against his chest, and Daiichi wrapped his arms around her, holding her like she was something precious and fragile and worth protecting. In that moment, in the quiet of his private office above a restaurant in Ginza, the Yakuza boss and the chef crossed a line that would reshape both their lives. And in the underworld of Tokyo, where such things were noticed and analyzed and discussed in whispered conversations in back rooms, people began to understand that something fundamental had changed. Daiichi had found something worth more than power. He'd found something worth more than safety. He'd found something worth risking everything for. And that, in the Yakuza world, was the most dangerous thing of all. The news spread through Tokyo's underworld like ink through water. Daiichi, the Ginza boss, had taken a lover. Not a mistress kept in a discreet apartment with a monthly allowance. That would have been unremarkable, expected even. But a lover he'd brought into his inner circle. A woman who worked in his restaurant, a civilian with no connections to the Yakuza world. The rumors multiplied and twisted as they passed from mouth to mouth. She was a spy for a rival organization. She was blackmailing him. She'd put some kind of spell on him. He was losing his mind. None of it was true, but truth mattered less than perception in this world. Hana became aware of the shift gradually. The way conversations stopped when she entered rooms. The way certain men who'd always greeted her politely now looked through her as if she were invisible. The way Daiichi's lieutenants exchanged glances when she and Daiichi were in the same space. She'd known that their relationship would cause complications, but she hadn't fully grasped the magnitude until she overheard a conversation in the restaurant's back office. She'd been bringing fresh linens to the supply closet when she heard voices. Daiichi's and another man's, someone she recognized as Masaru, one of Daiichi's most trusted advisors. "This is a mistake," Masaru was saying, his tone respectful but firm. "She's a liability. Every rival organization in the city now knows that she's important to you. They'll use her." "Let them try," Daiichi replied calmly. "You're not thinking clearly. This isn't like you. The man I've known for 15 years would never allow personal feeling to compromise his position." There was a pause, and Hana held her breath, pressing herself against the wall so they wouldn't see her. "The man you've known for 15 years is tired," Daiichi said finally. "He's tired of being the man who solves every problem with violence. He's tired of looking in the mirror and seeing someone he doesn't recognize. Maybe that makes me weak. Maybe it makes me vulnerable. But it also makes me human, and I'm not sure I want to go back to being anything less." "Humanity is a luxury we can't afford in this business," Masaru said quietly. "Then maybe I need a new business," Daiichi replied. Hana retreated before they could discover her heart pounding. She'd known that Daiichi was powerful, that he commanded respect and fear in equal measure. But hearing him willing to risk his position for her made the reality of their situation crystallize in a way that terrified her. That night, she confronted him about it. They were in his apartment, a sleek modern space high above the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Tokyo like a kingdom spread out for inspection. Hana stood at the window, wrapped in one of his shirts, looking out at the glittering landscape. "Masaru thinks I'm a mistake," she said without preamble. Daiichi, who was pouring whiskey at the bar, didn't look surprised. "Masaru thinks a lot of things. Most of them are based on logic and experience, which is why I value his counsel. But not everything in life can be solved with logic." "He's right though," Hana said, turning to face him. "I am a liability. Any organization that wants to hurt you now knows exactly where to find me. They know I matter to you." "Yes," Daiichi said, walking toward her with 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed her one, and she took it automatically. "And that's a problem I'm going to have to solve, but not by pushing you away. That would only prove to them that they'd successfully exploited my weakness, which would make them bolder, not more cautious." "So what's the solution?" Hana asked. Daiichi was quiet for a moment, looking out at the city. "I'm going to make it clear that you're not a weakness. You're a strength. You're part of my inner circle, which means you're under my protection. And anyone who touches you will answer to me. I'm going to make sure every organization in this city understands that harming you would be more costly than any benefit they could gain." "That's just a different kind of violence," Hana said softly. "Yes," Daichi acknowledged. "But it's violence in service of protection rather than aggression. There's a difference." Hana took a sip of the whiskey, feeling it burn down her throat. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." "You are," Daichi said with absolute certainty. "You've already proven it. You survived an abusive relationship with Hideo. You built a career as a chef in one of the most competitive cities in the world. You work in my restaurant every day, surrounded by people who represent the underworld, and you do it with grace and professionalism. You're stronger than you think." "Strength isn't the same as wisdom," Hana said. "Maybe this is a mistake. Maybe we should—" "No," Daichi interrupted, and there was something final in his voice. "I've spent my entire adult life making calculated decisions based on risk and reward. I've built an empire by being cold and logical and willing to do things that most people couldn't live with. But I'm done with that version of myself. I'm done pretending that I don't feel anything, that I don't want anything beyond power and control. You're the first thing in 20 years that's made me want to be different, and I'm not going to let that go because it's complicated or dangerous." Hana set down her glass and moved into his arms, and he held her like she was the most important thing in his world. In that moment, she believed him. She believed that he meant what he said, that he was willing to risk everything for her. But she also understood, with a clarity that came from years of watching people navigate complicated relationships, that belief wasn't enough. Belief didn't protect you from the consequences of your choices. The consequences started arriving 3 days later. Hana was leaving the restaurant after her shift when she noticed the car following her. It was subtle. They didn't try to hide it, which meant they wanted her to know she was being watched. She walked to the train station with her heart hammering in her chest, acutely aware of the vehicle moving slowly behind her, keeping pace. She called Daichi as soon as she was on the train. "I'm being followed," she said without preamble. There was a pause, then, "Are you safe right now?" "I'm on the train. There are people around me." "Stay on the train. Go to Shinjuku Station. I'm sending someone to meet you there." 20 minutes later, a man she recognized as one of Daichi's security team was waiting for her at the station. He was large, with the kind of scarred face that suggested a history of violence, and he didn't speak as he escorted her to a waiting car. The drive took them to a different part of the city, to a building she didn't recognize. The man led her to an apartment on the 5th floor and unlocked the door with a key. "Stay here," he said. "Daichi will be here soon." The apartment was sparse but comfortable. A bedroom, a bathroom, a small kitchen, and a living room with a view of the street below. It was clearly a safe house, a place designed for people who needed to disappear for a while. Hana sat on the couch and tried to calm her racing thoughts. Daichi arrived an hour later, and she could see immediately that he was angry, not at her, but at the situation, at the violation of her safety, at the fact that his enemies had made their move. "The car that followed you belonged to the Shimazu organization," he said without preamble. "They're testing me, seeing how I'll respond. It's a calculated provocation." "Why?" Hana asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Because they see you as an opportunity," Daichi said, sitting down beside her. "They see that I care about you, and they think they can use that against me. They think that if they threaten you, I'll make a mistake, that I'll act emotionally instead of strategically, and that will give them an opening to move against me." "Will you?" Hana asked quietly. "Make a mistake?" Daichi looked at her for a long moment. "I don't know," he said finally. "That's what frightens me. For the first time in my life, I'm not sure I can be counted on to make the logical choice. I'm not sure I won't burn this entire city down if something happens to you." Hana felt a chill run through her. "Then maybe we need to end this. Maybe we need to—" "No," Daichi said firmly. "We're not ending this. But we are going to take precautions. You're not going back to your apartment. You're not going anywhere alone. And you're going to learn how to protect yourself." "You're going to teach me?" Hana asked, surprised. "No," Daichi said. "I'm going to have Masaru teach you. He's one of the best fighters I know, and he's also one of the few people I trust completely. If you're going to be part of my life, you need to be able to defend yourself. Not because I think you'll ever be in a position where you have to, but because knowing you can will make me less likely to do something reckless. Over the next 2 weeks, Hana's life transformed in ways she couldn't have anticipated. She moved into Daiichi's apartment permanently. She began training with Masaru 3 times a week, learning basic self-defense, learning how to read situations, learning how to move through the world with awareness and caution. She continued working at the restaurant, but now she was always accompanied by security, always watched, always aware of the invisible lines that separated her from the rest of the civilian world. And slowly, something unexpected happened. Masaru, who'd initially opposed her relationship with Daiichi, began to respect her. He saw her commitment to the training, her willingness to learn, her refusal to complain or ask for special treatment. He saw the way she looked at Daiichi, not with the desperate devotion of someone who'd been seduced by power, but with genuine affection and understanding. And he saw the way Daiichi looked at her, like she was the only real thing in a world of shadows and illusions. One afternoon, after a particularly intense training session, Masaru sat down beside Hana in the apartment's living room while she was icing her bruised ribs. "He's different with you," Masaru said without preamble. "Is that good or bad?" Hana asked. "I'm not sure yet," Masaru admitted. "In this business, change usually means vulnerability. But maybe that's not always a bad thing. Maybe he needed to remember that he's human." He paused. "I've known Daiichi for 15 years. I've seen him make decisions that cost people their lives. I've seen him do things that would make most people's souls break. But I've also seen him try to be better. He's just not always successful." "What are you trying to tell me?" Hana asked. "I'm telling you that if you're going to be with him, you need to understand what you're getting into. He's not going to change completely. He can't. This world won't let him. But he's going to try, and that effort is going to cost him. It's going to cost both of you." "I know," Hana said quietly. "Do you?" Masaru asked, and there was something almost gentle in his voice. "Do you really understand that loving him means accepting that he's going to do things that will horrify you? That he's going to make choices that will hurt people? That you're going to have to live with that knowledge every single day?" Hana didn't answer immediately. She thought about the bruises on her wrists from Hideo, about the way Daiichi had solved that problem without violence, about the mercy he'd shown. But she also thought about the Shimazu organization, about the car that had followed her, about the fact that somewhere in this city, there were people plotting against Daiichi, people who would hurt her if they thought it would give them an advantage. "Yes," she said finally. "I understand." Masaru nodded slowly. "Then you're stronger than I gave you credit for. And maybe Daiichi isn't as much of a fool as I thought for choosing you." The Shimazu organization made their next move 2 weeks later. It was subtle, designed to send a message rather than cause direct harm. They had someone plant a listening device in the restaurant's kitchen, a small microphone hidden in one of the ventilation ducts. It was discovered by Daiichi's security team during a routine sweep, and when Daiichi found out, Hana saw something shift in him. He didn't rage. He didn't order immediate retaliation. Instead, he sat in his office for hours, thinking, planning, calculating. And when he finally emerged, he had a plan that was far more sophisticated than simple violence. He had his people plant false information in the restaurant, details about shipments that didn't exist, conversations about business deals that were fabricated, intelligence that was designed to mislead. He let the Shimazu organization listen, let them gather their false intelligence, and then he waited to see what they would do with it. When they acted on the false information, sending men to intercept a shipment that didn't exist, moving against a business partner who'd never been contacted, Daiichi was ready. He had evidence of their actions, documentation of their crimes, and he delivered it all to the police with careful anonymity. The Shimazu organization found themselves under investigation, their operations disrupted, their leadership questioned. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, in using an enemy's own assumptions against them. Hana watched Daiichi orchestrate this campaign from the shadows, and she understood something fundamental about him. He was brilliant, not just intelligent, but brilliant in a way that transcended normal understanding. He could see several moves ahead, could anticipate reactions, could manipulate circumstances with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. But that brilliance came at a cost. It meant he was always thinking, always calculating, always aware of threats and opportunities. It meant he could never fully relax, never fully trust, never fully let his guard down. One night, she found him on the balcony of his apartment, looking out at the city, and she realized he looked exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. "Are you okay?" she asked, moving to stand beside him. "No," he said simply. "But I will be. Eventually." "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about the fact that I've spent 20 years building an empire, and I've never felt as vulnerable as I do right now," he said. "I'm thinking about the fact that you matter more to me than any of it, and I'm thinking about what that means for the future." "What does it mean?" Hana asked. Daiichi turned to face her, and in the light from the city below, she could see the weight of his years, the burden of his choices, the complexity of the man he'd become. "It means I need to start thinking about an exit strategy," he said. "It means I need to start planning for a life after this. It means I need to figure out how to be the man you deserve instead of the man I've been." Hana felt her heart clench. "You're talking about leaving the Yakuza." "I'm talking about considering it," Daiichi corrected. "Not immediately. Not in a way that would put us in danger. But eventually. Yes." "That's not possible," Hana said, though she wanted desperately to believe it was. "Once you're in, you don't just leave." "I know," Daiichi said, "which is why I need to be very careful about how I do it. But I'm going to figure it out. Because the alternative, spending the rest of my life in this world, dragging you deeper into it, watching you become corrupted by it, that's not acceptable to me anymore." Hana stepped into his arms, and he held her as they looked out at Tokyo spread below them like a promise and a threat in equal measure. The plan to extract himself from the Yakuza world couldn't be rushed. Daiichi understood this with the clarity that came from 2 decades of experience. Leaving too quickly would be seen as weakness, would invite challenges from rivals, would destabilize the organization he'd built. But leaving too slowly meant years of living in this liminal space. Years of pretending to be something he no longer wanted to be. Years of watching Hana navigate a world that grew more dangerous every day. He began by consolidating power in a different way. Instead of expanding his territory or increasing his criminal enterprises, he started legitimizing his businesses. The restaurant became genuinely profitable, attracting high-end clientele who came for Hana's innovative cuisine. He acquired a nightclub, a hotel, several pachinko parlors, all legitimate fronts that generated real income. He was building a legitimate empire that could eventually replace the criminal one. But this transition didn't go unnoticed. Within 3 months, the first serious challenge came from an unexpected direction. Hana was in the kitchen preparing for the evening service when Daiichi's security team arrived with urgent news. There was a situation at one of his pachinko parlors in Shinjuku. A man had arrived claiming to represent the Yamagata family, one of the largest Yakuza organizations in Japan. He was demanding a meeting with Daiichi. "What does he want?" Daiichi asked, his voice betraying nothing. "He wouldn't say," the security chief replied. "But he came alone, which suggests this isn't a direct threat, more like a negotiation." Daiichi nodded slowly. "Tell him I'll meet him, but not at the parlor. Neutral ground, the tea house in Roppongi, tomorrow at noon." That evening, Daiichi told Hana about the meeting. They were in bed, the city lights filtering through the curtains, and she felt him tense beside her when he explained what was happening. "What does the Yamagata family want with you?" she asked. "I don't know yet," Daiichi admitted. "But the fact that they're reaching out personally suggests it's significant. The Yamagata don't waste time on minor matters." "Is it dangerous?" "Everything in this world is dangerous," Daiichi said. "But a meeting in a public place with a single representative is relatively low risk. If they wanted to hurt me, they wouldn't do it this way." Hana wanted to ask him not to go, wanted to beg him to find a way to avoid the meeting. But she understood that wasn't realistic. This was the world he inhabited, and these were the rules he had to follow. Instead, she held him closer and tried to memorize the feeling of him beside her, as if she could protect him through sheer force of will. The next day, Daiichi arrived at the tea house precisely at noon. The man waiting for him was in his 60s, with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades in positions of authority. His name was Takeshi Yamagata, and he was the patriarch of his family. "Thank you for meeting with me," Takeshi said after they'd exchanged the formal courtesies required by their world. "I know you're a busy man." "I'm curious," Daichi replied. "The Yamagata don't typically reach out to smaller organizations unless there's a specific reason." "You're not as small as you once were," Takeshi observed. "In fact, you've been making quite a few changes recently. Legitimizing your businesses, reducing your criminal operations, consolidating your power in unexpected ways. It's an interesting strategy." "Is it a problem?" Daichi asked carefully. "Not necessarily," Takeshi said, sipping his tea. "In fact, I find it intriguing. You see, I've been in this business for 40 years, and I've learned that most men in our position become more entrenched in the criminal world as they age. They accumulate power, accumulate enemies, accumulate the kind of baggage that makes it impossible to ever leave. But you seem to be moving in the opposite direction. You seem to be trying to build an exit." Daichi didn't respond immediately. He was trying to understand where this conversation was heading, what Takeshi wanted from him. "I'm going to be direct," Takeshi continued. "I'm dying. Cancer. The doctors give me maybe 2 years. When I'm gone, there's going to be a power struggle within my organization. My sons are capable, but they're not visionary. They'll maintain what I've built, but they won't evolve it. I've been looking for someone to mentor, someone who understands that the future of the Yakuza isn't in traditional crime, but in legitimate business. Someone who's already figured out how to transition." "You want me to work with you," Daichi said, understanding dawning. "I want you to learn from me," Takeshi corrected. "And eventually, when I'm gone, I want you to help guide my organization through its own transition. In exchange, I can offer you protection, resources, and most importantly, a way out. When you're ready to leave, you won't have to fear retaliation from other organizations. You'll have the Yamagata's blessing." It was an extraordinary offer. In the Yakuza world, leaving with honor was nearly impossible. But with the backing of a major organization like the Yamagata, it became possible. "Why me?" Daichi asked. "You don't know me." "I know your reputation," Takeshi said. "I know that you solved the Hideo Tanaka situation without unnecessary violence. I know that you've been systematically reducing your criminal operations while maintaining your power. I know that you took a lover from outside the Yakuza world, which suggests you're willing to risk everything for something you believe in. And I know that you're brilliant." He paused. "I also know that you're in love, and that love is making you want to be better. That's rare in this world. Most men in our position become harder, colder, more entrenched. But you're becoming more human. That takes courage." Daichi left the meeting with a great deal to think about. He didn't commit to anything, but he didn't refuse either. He told Takeshi he would consider the offer and get back to him within a week. When he told Hana about the conversation, she was quiet for a long time. "This could be a trap," she said finally. "He could be testing you, seeing if you'll betray your current organization." "I know," Daichi said, "but I don't think so. I've learned to read people in this business, and Takeshi wasn't lying. He's dying, and he's looking for a successor who understands the future better than his own sons do." "What are you going to do?" Hana asked. "I'm going to accept his offer," Daichi said. "But carefully. I'm going to maintain my current position, while gradually taking on more responsibility within the Yamagata organization. It's a long-term play, but it gives me options. It gives us options." Over the next 6 months, Daichi's life became a delicate balancing act. By day, he ran his legitimate businesses and maintained his position within his current organization. By night, he met with Takeshi, learning the intricacies of managing a larger, more complex criminal enterprise. He learned about money laundering, about political connections, about how to maintain power without constant violence. But more importantly, he learned about Takeshi's vision for the future. The older man was genuinely trying to transition the Yamagata organization toward legitimate business, to reduce their dependence on crime, to build something that could survive in a world where law enforcement was becoming more sophisticated and more aggressive. "The Yakuza as it exists now is dying," Takeshi told him one evening. "In 20 years, maybe 30, The traditional criminal organizations won't be able to operate the way they do now. The government is getting smarter, technology is making it harder to hide, and the public is becoming less tolerant of our presence. The organizations that survive will be the ones that adapt, that find ways to legitimize themselves, that build real businesses instead of just criminal enterprises. You think the Yakuza will disappear? Daichi asked. No, Takeshi said. I think it will evolve. The structure, the loyalty, the code, those things will remain. But the methods will change. The men who understand this transition will be the ones who lead in the future. The men who cling to the old ways will be left behind. Hana watched this transformation with a mixture of hope and fear. She saw Daichi becoming more confident, more strategic, more willing to think long-term. But she also saw him becoming more distant, more consumed by the complexities of his position. He was living in two worlds simultaneously, and the strain was beginning to show. One night, she found him in his office at the restaurant, staring at financial statements, looking exhausted. When does this end? She asked quietly. Daichi looked up, and she saw the weariness in his eyes. I don't know. Takeshi's health is declining faster than expected. The doctors now say he has maybe 6 months. When he dies, there's going to be chaos within the Yamagata organization. His sons will fight for control, and I'll need to position myself carefully to help guide the transition without appearing to be a threat. And then, Hana pressed. And then, if everything goes according to plan, I'll have enough power and influence within the Yamagata to negotiate my exit. I'll hand over my current organization to someone I trust, and I'll focus entirely on the legitimate businesses. Within 5 years, maybe less, I could be completely out of the criminal world. 5 years, Hana repeated, and the words felt heavy in her mouth. I know it's a long time, Daichi said, standing up and pulling her into his arms. But it's a timeline. It's a path forward, and it's more than I had before. Hana rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, and tried to believe that 5 years was manageable, that they could survive 5 more years of living in this liminal space between two worlds. But the universe had other plans. 3 weeks later, Hideo Tanaka resurfaced in their lives. He'd been quiet for months, seemingly chastened by his encounter with Koji in the Yakuza world. But apparently, he'd been using that time to plan his revenge. He showed up at the restaurant one evening, drunk and angry, demanding to see Hana. The security team tried to remove him, but he made a scene, shouting accusations, drawing attention from the customers. Hana, hearing the commotion from the kitchen, came out to see what was happening. You think you're better than me now? Hideo screamed at her. You think you can just move on to someone else? Someone powerful? And I'm supposed to accept that? You're a whore, Hana. You always were. You just found a richer man to spread your legs for. The restaurant fell silent. Everyone was watching, waiting to see how Daichi would respond. Daichi, who'd been in his office, emerged calmly. He looked at Hideo with an expression of such complete disdain that the younger man actually took a step back. You're going to apologize to Hana, Daichi said quietly. You're going to leave this restaurant. And you're going to understand that if you ever come near her again, if you ever speak to her, if you ever even think about her, the consequences will be severe. Or what? Hideo challenged, emboldened by alcohol and rage. You'll have your Yakuza friends beat me up? I'm not afraid of you. I know you're not. Daichi said, and there was something almost sad in his voice. That's the problem. You don't understand the difference between fear and respect. You don't understand that there are consequences for your actions that go far beyond physical pain. He snapped his fingers and his security team moved forward, but instead of beating Hideo, they simply escorted him to the door and threw him out onto the street. It was almost anticlimactic, which somehow made it more terrifying. But Hideo wasn't finished. Over the next week, he began making calls, reaching out to people in the criminal underworld, trying to find someone who would help him hurt Daichi, who would help him take revenge for his humiliation. He was desperate, reckless, and completely out of his depth. The problem was, his desperation eventually reached someone who was willing to listen. A man named Kenji, who worked for a rival organization, saw an opportunity. If he could help Hideo hurt Daichi, it would weaken Daichi's position, create chaos within his organization. and potentially give Kenji's own organization an advantage. It was a calculated move, a chess piece being moved on the board of Tokyo's underworld. Kenji reached out to Hideo and offered him a deal. He would help Hideo take revenge on Daiichi, but in exchange, Hideo would owe him a favor. Hideo, desperate and angry, agreed without fully understanding what he was agreeing to. The plan was simple and brutal. They would kidnap Hana, use her as leverage against Daiichi, force him to either surrender his organization or watch the woman he loved be killed. It was a classic Yakuza tactic, one that had been used countless times before. But what Kenji didn't know was that Daiichi had been expecting something like this. He'd known from the moment Hideo resurfaced that trouble was coming. He'd increased Hana's security, had people watching Hideo's movements, had prepared contingencies for exactly this scenario. When Kenji's men made their move, they found that Hana wasn't where they expected her to be. She was in a safe house, surrounded by security, protected by a network of people who'd been trained to keep her alive. And Daiichi, instead of panicking or acting emotionally, did something far more devastating. He used the kidnapping attempt as justification to move against Kenji's organization. He went to the police with evidence of the plot, evidence that had been carefully gathered and preserved. He went to Takeshi Yamagata and informed him of the attempted violation of the Yakuza code, that Kenji's organization had attempted to kidnap a civilian without proper authorization from the higher councils. The result was swift and brutal. Kenji's organization was investigated by the police, their operations disrupted, their leadership questioned, and within the Yakuza world, they were sanctioned by the higher councils for violating protocol. It was a double attack, legal and criminal simultaneously, and it destroyed Kenji's position almost completely. Hideo, realizing he'd made a terrible mistake, tried to run, but Daiichi had anticipated this too. He had people watching Hideo, and when the younger man tried to flee the city, he was intercepted. Not killed, not even seriously hurt, but made to understand, in very clear terms, that he could never escape the consequences of his actions. Hideo ended up in a psychiatric hospital, officially admitted for a nervous breakdown. Unofficially, he'd been broken by the realization that he'd set in motion events far beyond his understanding or control. When Hana was finally released from the safe house and returned to Daiichi's apartment, she was shaking with a combination of fear and relief and anger. "This has to stop," she said, her voice raw. "This cycle of violence and revenge and people trying to hurt us, it has to stop." "I know," Daiichi said, and he looked more tired than she'd ever seen him. "And I'm going to make sure it does." "How?" Hana demanded. "How are you going to stop it when you're the one creating it? Every time you respond to a threat, you create new enemies. Every time you use your power to protect me, you make me a bigger target." "You're right," Daiichi said quietly, "which is why I'm accelerating my timeline. I'm going to talk to Takeshi tomorrow. I'm going to tell him I'm ready to make my move, ready to transition completely. I'm going to get us out of this world, Hana. I'm going to do it faster than I planned." "Can you?" Hana asked, hope and doubt warring in her voice. "Can you really just leave?" "I don't know," Daiichi admitted. "But I'm going to try. Because the alternative, watching you live in fear, watching you become a target, watching this world consume both of us, that's not acceptable. I'd rather burn everything down than let that happen." Hana moved into his arms, and they stood together in the darkness of his apartment, looking out at the city that had become both their home and their prison. Takeshi Yamagata died on a Tuesday morning in early spring, with cherry blossoms falling outside his hospital window like snow. Daiichi was there, along with Takeshi's sons and a handful of his most trusted advisors. The old man's final words were directed at Daiichi. "Guide them well. Build something that lasts." Then he was gone, and the Yakuza world shifted on its axis. Within hours, the Yamagata organization began to fracture. Takeshi's eldest son, Hiroshi, was technically the heir, but he lacked his father's vision and political acumen. His younger brother, Noboru, was more aggressive, but also more reckless. The organization's various divisions began jockeying for position, sensing weakness at the top, preparing to make moves that would have been unthinkable while Takeshi lived. Daiichi received calls from both brothers within the first day. Hiroshi wanted his counsel, his support, his legitimacy. Noboru wanted his allegiance, his resources, his willingness to back a more aggressive approach to the transition. Daiichi told both of them he would consider their requests and get back to them. Instead, he did something far more strategic. He called a meeting of the Yamagata organization's senior leadership, not just the family members, but the heads of the various divisions, the men who actually ran the day-to-day operations. He held the meeting in a neutral location, a private room in a luxury hotel, and he came prepared with a proposal. Takeshi-san told me before he died that the future of the Yakuza lies in legitimacy, Daiichi began, addressing the assembled men. He told me that the organizations that survive the next 20 years will be the ones that adapt, that build real businesses, that reduce their dependence on traditional crime. I believe he was right. And I believe that the Yamagata organization is in a unique position to lead this transition. What are you proposing? One of the division heads asked. I'm proposing that instead of fighting over who controls the family, we create a new structure, Daiichi said. A council of senior leaders, with Hiroshi as the nominal head, maintaining the family's honor and tradition, but with actual decision-making power distributed among the council. We focus on expanding our legitimate businesses, on building real wealth that can be passed down through generations, on positioning ourselves as the Yakuza organization that successfully transitioned into the modern world. And what do you get out of this? Another man asked, his tone suspicious. I get to help build something that matters, Daiichi said. I get to work with men I respect. And eventually, I get to step back and let the next generation take over. Takeshi-san taught me that the mark of a true leader isn't how long you hold power, but how well you prepare others to wield it after you're gone. The proposal was radical, but it resonated with many of the men in the room. They were tired of the constant violence, the legal troubles, the uncertainty of the traditional Yakuza life. They saw in Daiichi's proposal a path to wealth and stability that didn't require them to constantly look over their shoulders. Over the next 3 weeks, Daiichi orchestrated a careful political campaign. He met with each division head individually, addressing their concerns, offering them positions of authority within the new structure, making sure they understood that his proposal benefited them as much as it benefited the organization as a whole. He worked with Hiroshi to present the proposal to the family, framing it as honoring Takeshi's vision rather than abandoning tradition. By the time the formal vote was held, the outcome was essentially predetermined. The council structure was adopted, with Hiroshi as the ceremonial head and Daiichi as the de facto leader of the transition. It was a position of immense power, but it was also a position that came with an expiration date. Daiichi had built into the structure a succession plan that would eventually allow him to step back without destabilizing the organization. Hana watched all of this unfold with a mixture of admiration and concern. She saw Daiichi working 18-hour days, navigating the complex politics of the Yakuza world, building alliances, consolidating power. But she also saw him becoming more withdrawn, more isolated, more consumed by the weight of what he was trying to accomplish. One night she found him on the balcony of his apartment at 3 in the morning, staring out at the sleeping city. "You're not sleeping," she said, moving to stand beside him. "There's too much to do," Daiichi replied. "The transition is more complicated than I anticipated. There are factions within the organization that are resisting the shift toward legitimacy. Some of the older members see it as a betrayal of Yakuza principles. Others are worried about losing their positions of power." "Can you handle it?" Hana asked. "I don't know," Daiichi admitted. "I'm trying to move too fast. I'm trying to accomplish in months what should take years. But I can't wait years, Hana. I can't ask you to wait years. I can't keep you living in this world, constantly in danger, constantly uncertain." Hana took his hand. "I'm not going anywhere. But I need you to be careful. I need you to not burn yourself out trying to save me." "That's not what I'm doing," Daiichi said. "I'm not saving you. I'm saving myself. I'm trying to become someone I can live with, someone I can look at in the mirror without feeling disgust. You're just the reason I finally found the motivation to try." Over the next 2 months, Daiichi made significant progress. The Yamagata organization began a systematic transition toward legitimate business. They divested from their most obviously criminal operations, sold off their drug distribution networks, closed their illegal gambling establishments. On the surface, it looked like a weakening of the organization. In reality, it was a strategic repositioning. The money that had been tied up in criminal enterprises was redirected into legitimate businesses. Real estate, restaurants, hotels, entertainment venues. Daiichi used his connections within the Yakuza world to help other organizations make similar transitions, building goodwill and creating a network of allies who had a vested interest in the success of his model. But not everyone was happy with these changes. There was a faction within the Yamagata organization, led by a man named Isamu, who believed that abandoning traditional crime was a betrayal of Yakuza principles. Isamu was in his 50s, had been with the organization for 30 years, and had built his power on the foundation of the old ways. He saw Daiichi's reforms as a direct threat to his position and his identity. Isamu began making moves to undermine Daiichi's authority. He reached out to other organizations, suggesting that the Yamagata were weakening, that they were vulnerable to being absorbed or taken over. He encouraged the younger, more aggressive members of the organization to resist the transition toward legitimacy. He was building a coalition of opposition, and if he succeeded, it could tear the Yamagata organization apart. Daiichi became aware of Isamu's activities through his network of informants, and he understood immediately that this was a critical moment. If he didn't handle Isamu carefully, the entire transition could collapse. But if he handled it too harshly, he would confirm the fears of those who believed he was abandoning Yakuza principles. He decided to meet with Isamu directly. They met in a private room in a traditional Japanese restaurant, the kind of place where Yakuza had conducted business for decades. Isamu arrived with 2 bodyguards, which Daiichi took as a sign of his hostile intentions. Daiichi had brought Masaru, his most trusted advisor. "I know what you've been doing," Daiichi said without preamble. "I know you've been reaching out to other organizations. I know you've been encouraging resistance within our own ranks." "And what are you going to do about it?" Isamu asked, his tone challenging. "Are you going to have me killed? Are you going to prove that you're just as ruthless as any Yakuza boss, despite all your talk about reform and legitimacy?" "No," Daiichi said calmly. "I'm going to offer you a choice. You can accept the transition and find a position within the new structure that honors your experience and your loyalty to the organization. Or you can leave, take your followers with you, and try to build something on your own. But what you can't do is stay and undermine what we're building." "That's not a real choice," Isamu said bitterly. "You're asking me to abandon everything I've built, everything I believe in, to become part of your vision of a sanitized Yakuza. That's not a choice. That's surrender." "It is a choice," Daiichi replied. "And it's the only one I'm offering. Because I'm not going to fight you, Isamu. I'm not going to have you killed or beaten or driven out. I'm going to let you choose your own path. But understand this. If you choose to continue undermining the organization, if you choose to work against the transition, then you're choosing to position yourself as an enemy. And I will respond accordingly." Isamu stared at him for a long moment, and Daiichi could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Isamu was trying to determine if Daiichi was bluffing, if he was really willing to let this challenge go unanswered. "I need time to think about it," Isamu said finally. "You have 1 week," Daiichi replied. "After that, I need an answer." Isamu left the meeting, and Daiichi knew that the next week would be critical. Isamu would be reaching out to his allies, testing the waters, trying to determine if he had enough support to challenge Daiichi directly. And Daiichi would be waiting, ready to respond. But what neither of them anticipated was that Isamu would make a move that would force Daiichi's hand in an unexpected way. Isamu, desperate to consolidate his position and prove his strength, reached out to a rival organization and proposed a joint operation. Together, they would move against the Yamagata, destabilize Daiichi's leadership, and carve up the organization between them. It was a bold move, but it was also a violation of the Yakuza code. You didn't invite outside organizations to move against your own family without going through proper channels. When Daiichi found out about Isamu's betrayal, and it was betrayal in the truest sense, he had to make a decision. He could have Isamu killed, which would send a clear message to anyone else considering similar moves. Or he could handle it in a way that was more consistent with his vision of reform. He chose a third path. He went to the Yakuza Council, the governing body that oversaw disputes between organizations, and he filed a formal complaint against Isamu for violating the code. He presented evidence of Isamu's attempts to invite a rival organization to move against the Yamagata. He made it clear that he was seeking a formal judgment, not personal revenge. The council, impressed by Daiichi's adherence to proper procedure, ruled in his favor. Isamu was formally censured and expelled from the Yakuza. His followers were given the choice to either renounce him or face expulsion themselves. Most chose to renounce him. Isamu, stripped of his position and his identity, left Tokyo and disappeared into obscurity. It was a masterclass in political maneuvering. Daiichi had eliminated his opposition without resorting to violence, had demonstrated his commitment to the Yakuza code even as he was reforming it, and had shown that there were consequences for betrayal. But those consequences didn't have to involve bloodshed. When Daiichi told Hana about how he'd handled Isamu, she felt something shift inside her. She saw him not just as a Yakuza boss trying to reform, but as a man genuinely trying to find a better way, trying to prove that power didn't have to be exercised through violence. "How much longer?" she asked him that night. "How much longer until you can step back? Until we can have a normal life?" 6 months, Daiichi said. Maybe less. I need to make sure the transition is stable, that the new structure can function without me. But I'm close, Hana. I'm so close to being able to walk away from all of this. Hana wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that in 6 months, they could leave this world behind, that they could build a life together that wasn't constantly shadowed by danger and violence. But she'd learned enough about the Yakuza world to understand that nothing was ever certain, that plans could change in an instant, that the future was always uncertain. Still, she held on to the hope. She held on to the belief that Daiichi's vision of a better future was possible. She held on to the man who'd shown her mercy when he could have shown her violence, who'd chosen to protect her instead of use her, who decided that love was worth more than power. And for a brief moment, it seemed like that hope might actually be justified. Then, on a rainy evening in late spring, everything changed again. Daiichi was meeting with Hiroshi and several other members of the Yamagata Council to discuss the next phase of the transition. They were in a private room in one of the organization's legitimate businesses, a high-end restaurant in the Minato district. Security was present, but it was discreet, the kind of security that didn't draw attention. What no one anticipated was that someone on the inside, someone they trusted, had been compromised. A man named Sato, who worked as a chef in the restaurant, had been approached by a rival organization weeks earlier. They'd offered him money, a lot of money, to provide information about Daiichi's movements and security arrangements. Sato had accepted, not out of loyalty to the rival organization, but out of desperation. He had gambling debts, and the money they offered was enough to clear them. Sato had been providing information for weeks, and the rival organization had been waiting for the right moment to move. That moment came on the rainy evening when Daiichi was meeting with the Yamagata Council. The attack came without warning. Men in dark clothing, armed with guns and knives, burst into the private room. Daiichi's security team responded immediately, but they were outnumbered and caught off guard. In the chaos that followed, 3 of Daiichi's men were killed, and Daiichi himself was shot in the shoulder. Masaru, moving with the reflexes of someone trained in violence, grabbed Daiichi and pulled him toward the back exit. They made it out of the restaurant and into a waiting car, driven by a member of Daiichi's security team, who'd been waiting outside. As they sped through the rainy streets of Tokyo, Daiichi pressed a hand to his bleeding shoulder and tried to assess the situation. The attack had been coordinated, professional, and devastating. It was the kind of attack that suggested someone on the inside had provided information. "Get me to the safe house," he told the driver. "And call Hana. Tell her to pack a bag and be ready to leave. We're going to have to disappear for a while." Masaru, sitting beside him in the back seat, looked grim. "This changes everything. Whoever did this just declared war." "I know," Daiichi said, and his voice was cold in a way that Hana had rarely heard. "And I'm going to find out who it was. And when I do, I'm going to make sure they understand the cost of their betrayal." For the first time since he'd met Hana, since he'd decided to reform, since he'd committed to building a better future, Daiichi felt the old darkness rising inside him. The part of him that had survived 20 years in the Yakuza world, that had built an empire through fear and violence, that had learned to see people as either assets or threats. And he understood, with a clarity that was almost painful, that walking away from this world might be impossible, that the world might not let him go. That sometimes, no matter how hard you tried to change, the past had a way of dragging you back. The safe house was located in the mountains outside Tokyo, a traditional Japanese home hidden among dense forest, accessible only by a narrow road that wound through the trees like a secret. Hana arrived there 2 hours after Daiichi, having been escorted by Masaru's team through a carefully planned route designed to ensure they weren't followed. She found Daiichi in a bedroom on the second floor, his shoulder bandaged, his face pale from blood loss. A doctor, someone from within the Yakuza network, someone who could be trusted to keep secrets, had already examined him and confirmed that the bullet had passed through muscle without hitting anything vital. He would recover, but it would take time. When Hana saw him, something inside her broke. She'd known intellectually that Daiichi was in danger, that his world was violent and unpredictable. But seeing him wounded, seeing the evidence of that violence written across his body, made it visceral in a way that abstract knowledge never could. "I'm sorry," Daiichi said as she approached the bed. "I'm sorry I brought you into this. I'm sorry I promised you a way out, and then failed to deliver it." Hana sat down beside him, careful not to jostle his injured shoulder, and took his uninjured hand. "Don't apologize. Just tell me what happened." Daiichi explained the attack, explained his suspicions about who might have been responsible, explained that the rival organization had clearly decided that the Yamagata's transition toward legitimacy represented a threat to their own operations. By weakening Daiichi and destabilizing the Yamagata, they could position themselves to take over some of the organization's territory and business interests. "It's a calculated move," Daiichi said, "and it's effective. Right now, the Yamagata organization is in chaos. My people are looking for whoever provided the information that allowed the attack to happen. Hiroshi is trying to maintain control, but there are factions within the organization that are questioning whether my vision is worth the cost. And I'm here, bleeding and unable to lead, which makes everything worse." Over the next 3 weeks, Daiichi recovered physically. The wound healed, the pain decreased, and his strength gradually returned. But during those 3 weeks, the Yamagata organization was in turmoil. Masaru, working from the safe house and communicating through secure channels, coordinated the investigation into who had provided the information that allowed the attack. It took 2 weeks to identify Sato, the chef who'd been compromised. Once they found him, they also found the rival organization that had recruited him, the Shimada family, a mid-sized Yakuza organization that had been looking for an opportunity to expand their territory. Daiichi faced a choice. He could have Sato killed, which would be the traditional Yakuza response to betrayal. He could have the Shimada family attacked, which would escalate the conflict and potentially lead to an all-out war between organizations. Or he could do something different. He called a meeting with the Yamagata Council. By this time, he was well enough to travel, and he made the journey back to Tokyo under heavy security. The meeting was held in a secure location, with only the most trusted members of the organization present. "I know who betrayed us," Daiichi said without preamble. "Sato, one of the chefs at the restaurant. He was recruited by the Shimada family and provided them with information about my movements and security arrangements. The attack was coordinated by the Shimada, with the goal of destabilizing our organization and positioning themselves to take over some of our territory." "What do you want to do?" Hiroshi asked. "I want to respond in a way that sends a message without escalating into an all-out war," Daiichi said. "First, regarding Sato, I'm going to have him arrested and turned over to the police. I'm going to make sure they know about his gambling debts, about how he was recruited, about how he betrayed the organization. He'll spend years in prison, and that will be a more effective deterrent than killing him. Every Yakuza in Tokyo will know that betrayal leads to imprisonment, not just death." "And the Shimada?" one of the council members asked. "The Shimada made a calculated move, and it failed," Daiichi said. "I'm going to make sure they understand that there are consequences for that failure. But I'm not going to start a war. Instead, I'm going to go to the Yakuza Council and file a formal complaint against them for unauthorized aggression against another organization. I'm going to present evidence of their attack, evidence of their recruitment of Sato, evidence of their intent to destabilize the Yamagata. And I'm going to request that the council impose sanctions on them." Daiichi's strategy worked. When he presented his case to the Yakuza Council, with detailed evidence of the Shimada's actions, the council ruled in his favor. The Shimada family was formally censured, fined a substantial amount of money, and required to provide compensation to the Yamagata for the attack. It was a stunning victory, achieved without violence, achieved through adherence to the Yakuza code itself. But the victory came at a cost. The incident had exposed weaknesses in the Yamagata organization, had shown that there were people within the organization who could be compromised, had demonstrated that the transition toward legitimacy was creating instability. Some of the older members of the organization began to question whether Daiichi's vision was worth the risk. Hiroshi, sensing the shifting mood, called Daiichi into a private meeting. "I think you should step back," Hiroshi said without preamble. "I think you should hand over leadership of the transition to someone else and focus on your legitimate businesses. The organization needs stability right now, and your presence is becoming destabilizing." Daiichi understood what Hiroshi was really saying. He was saying that Daiichi had become a liability, that his reforms were causing more problems than they were solving, that the organization would be better off without him trying to lead them into a new future. "You're right," Daiichi said, and the words felt like surrender. "I'll step back. I'll hand over my position to you and focus on the legitimate businesses. But I want something in exchange." "What?" Hiroshi asked. "I want your blessing to leave," Daiichi said. "Not just to step back from leadership, but to actually leave the Yakuza. I want to walk away completely, to focus entirely on my restaurants and my other legitimate businesses, to build a life outside of this world. And I want your word that you won't see that as a betrayal, that you won't hold it against me, or against anyone who works with me." Hiroshi was quiet for a long moment. "If I give you that blessing, it sets a precedent. Other men might want to leave as well. The organization might start to fragment." "Maybe," Daiichi said. "Or maybe it will evolve. Maybe it will become an organization where men can choose to leave with honor, where the transition from Yakuza to civilian is possible. Maybe that's what Takeshi-san was really trying to build." Hiroshi stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Tokyo spread below them. "I'll give you your blessing," he said finally. "But you have to understand, you'll never be completely free. You'll always be a Yakuza in the eyes of the world. You'll always be someone who people fear, someone who people approach with caution. You can't just erase your past." "I know," Daiichi said. "I'm not trying to erase it. I'm just trying to move past it." The formal announcement came a week later. Daiichi stepped down from his position within the Yamagata organization, citing health reasons and a desire to focus on his legitimate business interests. He was given an honorable discharge, which meant that he was free to leave the Yakuza world without fear of retaliation. It was unprecedented. Yakuza bosses didn't typically leave with honor, but Daiichi's contributions to the organization, his role in helping to transition the Yamagata toward legitimacy, and his adherence to the Yakuza code even as he was reforming it, had earned him enough respect that the organization was willing to make an exception. When Daiichi told Hana the news, she didn't believe him at first. "You're really leaving?" she asked. "You're really just walking away?" "I'm really leaving," Daiichi confirmed. "I'm going to focus on the restaurants, on building legitimate businesses, on creating something that doesn't depend on fear and violence. It won't be easy, and it won't be simple, but I'm going to try." Over the next 6 months, Daiichi systematically extracted himself from the Yakuza world. He transferred his remaining business interests to trusted lieutenants. He ensured that the transition within the Yamagata organization was stable and sustainable. He met with various Yakuza leaders to make it clear that he was leaving on good terms, that he wasn't abandoning his responsibilities, that he was simply choosing a different path. And slowly, gradually, he became a civilian. A year after Daiichi stepped down from the Yakuza, he and Hana got married in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. It wasn't a traditional Yakuza wedding, with all the rituals and ceremonies that would have been expected. It was a simple affair, held in a garden overlooking the city, with just the people they cared about most. As Daiichi and Hana exchanged vows, Hana thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought about the bruises on her wrists, about the moment Daiichi had seen them and chosen mercy instead of violence. She thought about all the times he'd put her safety above his own interests. All the times he'd chosen a harder path because it was the right path. All the times he'd proven that redemption was possible even in a world built on violence. "I promise to protect you," Daichi said, his voice steady. "Not through fear or violence, but through love and commitment. I promise to build a life with you that's based on something real, something true, something that matters. I promise to be the man you deserve, even when it's difficult, even when it would be easier to go back to the old ways." "I promise to stand beside you," Hana replied. "To support your journey, to believe in your vision, to help you build something beautiful from the ashes of your past. I promise to love you, not despite what you've been, but because of who you've chosen to become." They exchanged rings, and as they kissed, the people around them applauded. It was a moment of genuine happiness, genuine hope, genuine belief that change was possible. The restaurant in Ginza flourished under their ownership. Hana continued to work there as the head chef, and her innovative cuisine attracted high-end clientele from all over Tokyo. They opened a second restaurant, then a third. They began to build a legitimate business empire, one that was based on quality and service rather than fear and violence. Years later, as Daichi sat in his office reviewing the day's business, he received a visit from a young man named Kenji. Kenji was in his mid-20s, had been born into a Yakuza family, and was trying to figure out if there was a way to leave without being killed or imprisoned. "I heard you left the Yakuza with honor," Kenji said. "I heard you built a legitimate business and a real life. I wanted to know if it's possible, if there's really a way out." Daichi looked at this young man, saw in him the same desperation he'd felt, the same desire to be something more than what the Yakuza world demanded. And he understood that his journey, his struggle, his choice to reform and leave, had meaning beyond just his own life. "It's possible," Daichi said, "but it's not easy. It requires sacrifice, requires patience, requires the willingness to give up power in exchange for peace. It requires finding something worth more than the Yakuza world, something that makes you willing to risk everything to protect it." That evening, as Daichi and Hana closed the restaurant and prepared to go home, they walked through the quiet streets of Ginza, hand in hand, two people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to build something beautiful together. Behind them, the restaurant glowed with warm light, a beacon of legitimacy and hope in a city that had once seemed entirely consumed by shadow. The Yakuza world continued around them, unchanged and unchanging. But Daichi was no longer part of it. He'd found his way out, had built a life that proved that redemption was possible, had shown that mercy was stronger than brutality. And in a world built on fear and violence, that was the most revolutionary thing of all.